7 world championships, same number, same trophy cabinet. But here's the thing, and this is what keeps me awake at night. They didn't get there the same way. Not even close. Marc Marquez has equaled Valentino Rossi's premier class tally, and everyone's talking about the numbers, the stats, the podiums. But I'm talking about something far more dangerous to measure, something Rossi had that Marquez... Well, we need to dig into whether he truly possesses it, because a decade after their relationship shattered at Sepang, the real debate isn't about who won more, it's about who became a /legend/. And that's a conversation that cuts right to the heart of what makes MotoGP magic. Let me break down exactly what we're looking at here, because the statistical contrast is absolutely brutal. Valentino Rossi reached 7 titles in 166 race starts. Marc Marquez, 7 titles in 206 starts. That's 40 more entries, more chances, more circuits, more seasons grinding away. And yet, Rossi won 77 MotoGP races while Marquez has 73. The Spaniard has had significantly more opportunities and still trails in raw race wins. That alone tells you something about the DNA of these two riders. Rossi's entire philosophy was built on something almost mathematically beautiful. He finished on the podium in over 76% of his races. 76%. I'm talking about consistency that bordered on the supernatural. He wasn't the qualifying king. Only 48 pole positions compared to Marquez's 74, but that's exactly the point. Rossi played the long game. He understood that Sunday meant everything. He'd qualify 7th, 8th, and then methodically, surgically dissect his rivals over the course of the race distance. He'd build psychological pressure, adapt mid-race, and somehow always be there when it mattered. That's not just talent, that's mastery of an entirely different sport. The sport of racing itself, not just lap time hunting. Marquez, on the other hand, he redefined what the human body and a motorcycle could actually do. His podium percentage sits at 61.17%, exceptional by any standard, but considerably lower than Rossi's, because his entire approach was built on /extracting everything / on every single lap. His 74 pole positions tell the story of a rider who could take a bike to the absolute ragged edge, hang it out at angles that make physicists question the laws of gravity, and somehow pull pole position out of nothing. He normalized saving crashes at impossible lean angles. He looked at Michelin tires and basically said, yeah, I'm going to push them harder than anyone thought possible. That's not smart racecraft. That's brilliant violence. And here's where it gets interesting from a team and bike perspective. Rossi made dominance look effortless. Clean lines, smooth entries, almost balletic. Marquez made it look chaotic, brutal, and frankly, sometimes barely in control. When Rossi won, you'd think the bike was doing most of the work. When Marquez wins, you know with absolute certainty that he's physically dragging that machine across the line by sheer force of will. Those are two entirely different brands of excellence. Their podium totals are nearly identical. 127 for Rossi, 126 for Marquez. But the nature of those podiums? Completely different. Rossi's were inevitable. Marquez's were often earned in the closing laps through pure aggression and tire management brilliance. That difference mattered beyond statistics. It mattered in how fans perceived greatness itself. Now, before we talk about what defines a legend, we have to understand how these two went from mutual respect to something that still poisons MotoGP a full decade later. When Marquez was coming through the junior categories, he openly idolized Rossi. This wasn't manufactured for the cameras. This was genuine admiration. He studied Rossi's lines, praised his racecraft, and fundamentally wanted to be like him. But here's where the story darkens, and this is critical to understanding everything that followed. The 2015 campaign was supposed to be a 3-way battle between Rossi, Marquez, and Jorge Lorenzo. Instead, it became a psychological warfare match that culminated in one of the most infamous moments in modern MotoGP, Rossi kicking out at Marquez during their on-track battle at Sepang. Rossi accused Marquez of deliberately influencing the championship in Lorenzo's favor. Whether that was strategically accurate or not, it cracked something fundamental in the sport. The respect vanished. The line between aggression and malice got blurred, and the paddock split into factions. But here's the thing, and this is where Jorge Lorenzo's story becomes absolutely crucial. While everyone was focused on the Rossi-Marquez drama, Lorenzo was executing one of the most obsessively prepared championship campaigns the sport has ever witnessed. Lorenzo revealed that he had a cryo-sauna installed inside his motorhome. We're talking minus 180 degrees Celsius for 3 minutes after every single session. And get this, he deliberately kept it secret. He didn't want Rossi, who parked right next to him, to know about it. Not even his own manager knew. He was that paranoid about maintaining a competitive advantage. That's the level of obsession required to win a championship in that era. And it worked! Lorenzo delivered what he himself called the most perfect lap of his life to secure pole position at the decisive race. He then won that race, won the title, and arguably secured his greatest career achievement. Rossi, starting from the back, due to his penalty from Sepang, couldn't recover. The title went to Lorenzo. But the real casualty? The relationship between Rossi and Marquez, they've barely spoken since. Let me repeat that. /barely spoken since. And it's not just a paddock anecdote. This feud has literally divided MotoGP's fanbase. Marquez gets booed at every Italian circuit. The Tifosi never forgot. And here's the kicker that really shows the wound hasn't healed. Rossi was booed at the 2025 Valencia prize-giving ceremony. A decade later, and the sport is still bleeding from Sepang. Yet, and this is important, moments of sporting respect have surfaced. During Marquez's darkest period, when injuries sidelined him and his future was genuinely uncertain, Rossi publicly expressed confidence that Marquez would return as the man to beat. That's not something you say about someone you hate. That's something you say about someone you respect but can't forgive. Later, when Marquez was closing in on that 7th title, he made a point of not diminishing what the milestone meant. He admitted it was hard to believe he'd matched the man he once called his hero. That's a measured response from someone who understands the weight of history. But here's where the conversation shifts into something far more philosophically complex. And this is where a former MotoGP race winner, Andrea Ianone, dropped a comment that cut deeper than any statistical comparison ever could. Ianone said this, and I want you to listen carefully. Nobody doubts his talent and that he's fast, but he's not my favorite because I prefer Kevin Schwantz or Marco Lucinelli. Riders who have magic, attitude, and charisma, not just riding skills. I'm thinking, for example, of Valentino Rossi. Mark doesn't give off the same feeling. That is the real conversation. Guttering, zipping. Not who won more races, not who had better statistics. But does Marquez possess the magic that made Rossi unforgettable? Ianone stood firmly with Rossi during the 2015 fallout, and he hasn't softened his position. When reflecting on that infamous season, he added, "What happened tarnished his reputation and wasn't a good thing for the sport. Mark had that habit. He'd get alongside you and knock you out." Ianone credits Marquez's resilience and comeback from injury, but he draws a clear line between being a great champion and being a legend who defines eras. Casey Stoner, arguably the most technically honest voice from that generation, has repeatedly stated that Valentino Rossi made a critical mistake by starting that feud in 2015. Stoner said, "Mark, to a certain degree, deserved his criticism. But people forget that Valentino started it. His verdict was brutal in its clarity. If somebody rides aggressively and you know they're capable of that, don't think you're above them to scare them out of it. You're not going to scare someone like Marc Marquez out of it." What Stoner is really saying is that Rossi underestimated the new generation. He poked the most dangerous rider on the grid, someone who could beat him, someone who was faster than him, and expected to intimidate him out of it. That didn't work. Instead, it lit a fire under Marquez and arguably marked the beginning of Rossi's decline in terms of psychological dominance. He shifted from being the paddock's calculating puppet master to being emotionally overextended. Yet even Stoner acknowledges that the feud didn't erase respect. When Marquez equaled that 7th title, Stoner's acknowledgement was clear. The numbers might be identical, but the legacies are fundamentally different. And then there's Jorge Lorenzo, who remains perhaps the most balanced voice in this entire debate. Lorenzo's 2015 title victory showed just how intense the mental game had become. While everyone was obsessing over Rossi and Marquez, Lorenzo was executing like a machine. But here's what's fascinating. Lorenzo himself believes Marquez may be the greatest of all time. And yet, when pressed, he still hesitates to separate Marquez from Rossi. That hesitation speaks volumes. Even the man who beat them both in 2015 isn't entirely comfortable making that definitive call. Despite their fierce rivalry, Rossi later paid Lorenzo the ultimate compliment, calling him his favorite rider to battle on track, a testament to the mutual respect forged through shared excellence. That's the kind of bond that transcends championships. And here's something critical that nobody's really discussing. The grid today is cleaner, more corporate, more controlled. Riders are faster than ever, but personalities are smoother. Edges are softened. Controversy is managed rather than lived. In that environment, figures like Rossi feel even larger in hindsight. Rossi didn't just win championships, he shaped how MotoGP felt. His legend was written as much in press conferences and podium theatrics as it was in lap times. He had a theatrical connection with fans that went beyond trophies. Marquez? He's won more races on paper, but he hasn't created that same cultural footprint. He's been brilliant, occasionally controversial, sometimes divisive, but not magnetic in the way Rossi was. And that brings us to the fundamental conclusion that even Marquez himself seems to struggle with. Marc Marquez is unquestionably one of the greatest riders MotoGP has ever seen. 7 world championships. Extraordinary talent. Unmatched courage in adversity. His comeback from injury is one of sport's most extraordinary stories. But, as Andrea Ianone suggests, greatness alone doesn't always translate into myth. Magic is something different. Valentino Rossi didn't just win championships, he transformed how MotoGP felt. What Rossi created transcends statistics. It lives in memory, in culture, in the way fans speak about him decades later. Marquez has the trophies, but does he have that same essence? Here's my question for you. Now that Marquez has equaled Rossi's 7 titles, do you believe he's achieved true parity with the legend, or has Rossi's cultural impact and magic created a gap that statistics simply can't measure? Is it possible for a rider to be statistically equal but legendarily distant? Can Marquez ever close that gap, or is Rossi's legacy simply untouchable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one, and this debate deserves to be settled by the community. Subscribe for more deep dive MotoGP analysis, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.